Hello and welcome to INF851, Trends and Issues in Cybersecurity. My name is Jason Zeller. I'm a professor in the informatics department here at Fort Hays State University. My main responsibility is teaching the undergraduate and graduate cybersecurity programs, which are very technical, hands-on skills that students will learn in order to become cybersecurity analysts, be able to go out into jobs and perform things like penetration testing, do some cyber operations portions of that. Lots of good technical hands-on one. But what I love about this class is this is the opposite of the technical hands-on, right? So our goal here is to address some of the industry trends and look at some of the issues that are currently going on within cybersecurity and what you might be seeing within your particular job fields and careers. This is about the second or third time that this class is ran, so it's still fairly new. And what I've found with the particular audience is most of you are educators and working through additional credits in the system. So I tend to have an approach of going to things with a technical perspective, and I need to remember that I got to keep that a little more abstract. So if you find at any point in time I'm talking way too far up, please let me know. Our goal is not to do that here, but to see how this might affect you in your future career and what you're doing here within this class and the other courses you're taking at Fort Hays State. So we're going to take a look at some of the industry trends that are going on here, some things you guys might be very well aware of. Within this class, we're going to identify a few things. Some of them will be white papers that you'll read, and then you'll have some writing assignments to go back with. But some of the big industry trends that are going on right now, for example, are going to be denial of service attacks. Many of you may have seen these, particularly in the ransomware, where we've seen ransomware really blowing up. In 2020, 2021, we've seen ransomware attacks reach up to 20 billion, and that number has risen dramatically even since 2020. And just about everybody is susceptible to a ransomware attack. That's one of the big initiatives we have going on here at Fort Hays, where we have some state legislature money, and we've created a cybersecurity incubator, or an institute rather, as well as a tech incubator, in which we are trying to address cybersecurity threats and issues with small businesses in the state of Kansas. And so students will go out there and not only be able to do an assessment of their cybersecurity posture, but also able to fix those issues that are going on. And then in the future, we can recommend, companies in the state of Kansas that are excellent at handling those, particularly with small businesses where you may not have a bunch of money for startup costs. So that's one of the big initiatives that we have going on here, but it's extremely relevant to this class as getting people to understand that ransomware itself is taking off. And it doesn't matter whether you are a taco truck in the middle of nowhere, or if you are a grocery store, or just have a salon, any of those have a chance of becoming ransomware. And while people may not think that they're a target because they don't have a lot of money or there's not a lot of buildup in there, the truth of the matter is that they're not really interested in all your money. They're interested in your data, right? But they do want you to pay. And so what they'll do is they'll encrypt your data. That's part of the ransom portion of it. And then they'll ask for a particularly payment method, typically Bitcoin, which is a non-traceable type currency. And if they can tie up your business for a short amount of time, most people have to pay this fee in order to get their data back. As most of these small businesses are not holding cybersecurity insurance, which is growing rapidly. Even since I made this slide here, it's grown tremendously in terms of making sure that they have that. Most data breaches in large businesses can cost up to $700,000 or even more. We've seen small cities that have been taken for ransomware that were taken for millions and millions of dollars. So one of the big things that we have here is social engineering. Most of you may not understand what social engineering is or may not have heard of it, but the idea is that it is the top exploit still used by malicious actors in order to complete successful breaches. The idea behind social engineering is that threat actors will end up trying to trick unsuspecting employees, meaning that they'll collect information from you, maybe from social media websites, especially today, where there's a plethora of social media websites, including your LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. Any of those social sites are a way for us to collect information about you, and then we can go and make you feel like we're a friend, or that we are a partner in this, or that, we have an order coming through. We can see the kind of things that you like, and that we're going to offer you a free order going through for whatever product. It's a great way to catch people in doing that. And that's all through social engineering. It's really just what you see in the movies where people are, persuading their way through. If you've seen Ocean's 11, so to speak, that's a type of social engineering experiment where they pretend to be different people as they go through there in order to gain access to certain systems. We also see web application attacks. These are going to be web servers and such. That's the most second commonmost one out there, in which we are attacking different websites, particularly ones that are housing some kind of database and collecting information that may be of use of us as threat actors. And then last but not least is malware driven. We've seen a big increase in this where it's directly responsible for about 70% of all breaches. A lot of it is also insider threat, and this can come from intentional or non-intentional, meaning that we may have a threat actor within our system. And again, threat actors are people that just act upon different attacks, or they can exercise different attacks in a system. That may be a disgruntled employee, that may be somebody that didn't get that promotion that they were looking for, and so they will attack or take down systems within the actual network. This isn't all too common, but it does happen. Normally, this insider threat is really coming from security awareness, in which case they clicked an email that they shouldn't have, or they gave away a password on a phone call, etc. That's the kind of inside threat actors that hit more often than the disgruntled employee types. So when we kind of looked at a global sector and what are things kind of going on overall, during COVID-19, there was about a 16% increase in the focus of corporate resiliency. Why? Everybody had to start working from home. And so the idea is that all of these networks were not built with security in mind, but they had to continue running or they would fold up shop. So we would see more and more of these virtual private networks, or VPN type connection, in order for clients to connect back to the corporate network. However, while that all is secure and a secure way of getting back to the network there for whatever company they're working for, the bigger issue is that all these home networks were not secure, right? So I can create a VPN connection to secure myself from my laptop to you, but if I'm not securing my actual internet connection at my house, I am now open for people to jump through my laptop and then get access to the corporate network, where before the chances of them coming on a corporate network were minimal because most didn't have VPN set up. So COVID-19 really brought about the idea that cybersecurity is important and that we are going to see it in future years for sure as things continue to grow. Other things that are interesting within there, particularly in the fraud side of things, successful fraud attacks have kind of significantly escalated since the start of an economic shutdown. And we've seen a little bit from anywhere from 83.1% and 61% in e-commerce and retail fraud. So it's grown quite a bit as we move through there. And really getting people to be agile. If you guys haven't heard of the agility side of things, agile operating models, being able to use AI, machine learning, and some digital workers in order to collaborate and work from anywhere. We're going to go into that in a little bit more detail. So as you look through on web-based attacks, these are again applications or cloud-based email servers that have grown 9 times since 2020 and compared to the same period inside 2019. Injection attacks, which have been identified by OWASP. OWASP is an industry that is used by us techies to determine what are the most vulnerable applications that are out there today and what are the top 10 vulnerabilities for all of those. OWASP will report about 85% of released apps tend to have at least one security vulnerability. And this affects all industries, including gaming and digital manufacturing, as well as IT services. They all have fast growth, but they all are especially vulnerable to web application-based attacks. So we tend to see a lot of those type of attacks happening more than others anymore. All right. Other types of top attacks that you might have seen is going to be dynamic denial of services, or DDoS attacks. These are increasingly popular. They are in combination with botnet challenges. For example, even here in Hayes, America, our local high school was taken down by a DOS attack in which a student was not wanting to take an exam anymore. And so what they did was they hired a botnet to come and attack the Blackboard system that they use there. In this case, it was a different LMS. the equivalent of our Blackboard. And by taking that down, they just denial of service, meaning that they took down the web server so that no students could actually access that. It ended up not just taking down the website, but because of some misconfigurations, it was able to take down the entire internet connection for the school, which again, because there was some other misconfigurations, ended up taking down the internet service provider that was associated with it. So it was a rather large attack for a very minuscule thing, but because some cybersecurity things were not in place, it ended up being a much larger, much more significant issue overall. One big area that has kind of grown significantly in recent years is going to be the law side of cybersecurity, and particularly within privacy. We've seen a lot of different compliances come out. One of those biggest ones is like GRC, which has kind of grown. We've also seen in the EU, we have GDPR, which is a very big compliance. You guys might have noticed as you're out browsing the internet that you constantly have these pop-ups on every single site that you go to that forces you to read a message and then allow a cookie on your system. And that all came from GDPR, which was a pretty big um, law that came out in the EU, in which if a user wanted to have their information removed from your system, that the user or the company would have to comply. And this created a tremendous amount of head headache for most of the industries that were out there, as they now had to kind of push developers to not only allow this type of material in order to remove their information, but it also created a much larger workload for them in order to do that. So trying to get an automated system up and running, most companies couldn't do that. They had to really retool a lot of their websites and a lot of their systems in order to be compliant. Some of those biggest GRC attacks are very much in line with what we've talked about before. We've seen ransomware, third-party risk, data integrity, et cetera, going through there. So within cybersecurity, some of the things that we've seen lately that have kind of caused some issues, we've all seen the abundance of deep fakes that are out there, which can lead to biometrics type data no longer being as useful as it used to. So fingerprint scanning, eye retina scanning, et cetera, those kind of things can be faked more often than not now. We've seen a big abundance of machine learning and just IoT devices, which are kind of, used negatively to accelerate attacks on networks. So those of you that aren't familiar with IoT devices, these are going to be your little cameras and your thermostats and things that you use in your home that are now all smart and internet connected for our own convenience. But we actually use those little devices as bots and allow us to increasingly attack other networks. So instead of having to have a whole warehouse full of machines in order to create this denial of service attack, we can actually use things like thermostats and cameras and other sensors throughout your house and utilize the little bit of compute power they have in order to launch attacks against much larger systems. Of those, about 30% of the age of the fraudulent transactions arise from mobile platforms. I just got done writing some other papers about the transition of using NFC technology for payment processing, and how easy it is to capture some of that information from those cards. Most of you may have banking cards that have a smart little chip that's inside of them. It's great because we can tap and pay and we can be out of there right away without having to punch in a PIN. But there's some safeguards in there that need readdressed because the early versions of those were not quite as secure as they needed to be. All right. So as we talked about before, different attacks that are common here, ransomware being number one within security. We also have supply chain attacks. We've seen these recently where we had a SolarWinds attack here a while back, where the SolarWinds is basically a network monitoring system that's used by very large companies. And by taking down those network monitoring systems, it took down companies that actually supplied our nation. And by taking down those, we ended up with a bunch of supply chain issues. So we saw a lot of this even during COVID with supply chain issues going down. In cybersecurity, we would attack those supply chains to help minimize the effect of getting goods and services out to people. This was a huge attack even during the most recent Ukraine war, where but as Russia and the U.S. unfortunately was going in there. Russia was able to be limited by the supply chain attacks that were happening from Ukraine, in which we were stopping trucks from driving through. We were shutting down bridges. We were shutting down all sorts of communication. They did the same thing over to Ukraine in order to shut down those supply chains so that they would be crippled from the very beginning of the war itself. So lots of good supply chain attacks going on in order to kind of cripple business or cripple countries before they ever get started. Insider threats, as we mentioned before, this is generally going to be from not intended threat actors, but more of people not being aware of security awareness. One last thing I want to talk about here that's kind of a big trend and topic going on cybersecurity, but it's interesting because it's touching a bunch of different markets. We talked a little bit about machine learning, and now we have artificial intelligence blowing up. And so one of the big tools that's out there that everybody seems to be talking about now is Chat GPT. And if you're not familiar with what Chat GPT is, I encourage you to go out and do a little bit of research about that. It is essentially an artificial intelligence that it works in a very communicative, very simple chat type of environment. So you ask it a question and it returns content back to you. But it can do that, and it's extremely powerful in the information that comes back. The benefits of that are enormous. So for those of you that aren't familiar with, cybersecurity or programming, et cetera, you can ask it to do those kind of things for you, which means you can also kind of see where this would be in trouble in academia. We're seeing a huge increase in this use of ChatGPT in order to complete assignments. You may even have papers, for example, the papers in this class. You can ask ChatGPT to write those kind of papers. The problem is that it one uses a little bit older data set. It usually runs from 2021, but it also always thinks it's correct. So even if it gives you false information, it is going to be very reassuring to you that it is the correct information, even if it did not find the correct information. So in this class, that's one of the topics that we're going to be exploring later is ChatGPT and seeing how that could affect your cybersecurity posture or the information that you may be dealing with in your company. I strongly encourage you to go out and do the hello and welcome discussion board. We need to have that. It helps give me a background of where you guys are with cybersecurity and what your knowledge level is within that, and also what kind of issues and trends that you are seeing as well, so that we can discuss them. This is a very open class. It's a very fast-paced class. So I believe there's about 4 or 5 this semester in there. And so I really try to work with everybody in terms of getting some discussion going, because unfortunately this isn't a hands-on class per se, but I'm also not one to really assign very large discussion board forums and things like that where you have to reply 3 times to somebody else. I just don't find that beneficial. What I do find beneficial is the organic nature of some discussion boards and making sure that students understand assignments and are able to write back information and comprehend what they see. So if you have any questions, please feel free to email me, and I'm usually quick to respond to that.